for the average person, my advice would be take the capital that you want to invest for more than 4 years. If your time horizon is more than 4 years, if you want to hold it for 10 years, if you want to give it to your children, take a portion of that money, long-term capital, and buy Bitcoin with it. And if you're not sure how much to buy, then allocate 10 or 20 hours to read the Bitcoin Standard and study Bitcoin podcast. Buy 10%, put 10% in or 15%. And then the more time you spend, the more allocation you can create. The maxis would put 80% in or something,
Yeah.
but other people would only put 5% in. But for the average person, I would say study Bitcoin and decide what portion of your long-term capital you want to invest. For more talented people, they can start a company, the entrepreneurs. Start a company, and when you raise money for the company, instead of raising $2 million to pay your operating expenses, Bonnie, raise $10 million and invest $8 million in Bitcoin and use the $2 million for your operating expenses. Then I would say if you're able to raise another round of capital, raise $20 million after that and put it all into Bitcoin. And if you're able to go public, by all means, go public, raise 40 million more, put Bitcoin on the balance sheet. Here's an important point. Conventional financial wisdom says that volatility is bad. You shouldn't take risk. Volatility equals risk. You shouldn't take risk. You shouldn't embrace volatility. You should be safe with your balance sheet, and then you should risk your P&L. You should work really, really hard to make money in the operating business, but don't risk the balance sheet. That probably made sense 20, 30, 40 years ago. That made sense when you were growing up. When they wrote all the textbooks for Harvard B School Finance, that made sense because Bitcoin didn't exist. And Bitcoin wasn't an institutional asset. But really, volatility isn't risk. Volatility is vitality. Or another way to look at it is, it's like the RPM. If I spin an engine, maybe a balsa wood kid's propeller, and I spin at 90 RPM, it's just a kid's toy. And if I spin a 5-pound weight at 90 RPM, then it's a weapon. But if I take a 20-ton flywheel and I spin it at 90 RPM, it's a turbine. Okay? So if you embrace Bitcoin and you embrace volatility and you put $20 million of Bitcoin on your balance sheet and it's very volatile, you will make or lose more money on your balance sheet every day than you'll make in the podcasting business every year. So it'll be 365 times as volatile. But Bonnie, that will make you interesting. Interesting means I'll want to trade your stock. It means I will want to buy and sell your options. The basic principle of finance is if you have an interest in something, if you own it, you'll read about it and you'll want to buy it and sell it. If you're not interesting, I don't care about you. The truth is, if everybody wakes up and they decide you're overvalued by 5% and people sell $100 million of your stock tomorrow morning, then 3 days from now, they'll wake up and realize you're undervalued by 20% and they'll buy $200 million of your stock that morning. And so the volatility drives the liquidity, and that drives the optionality, and that attracts capital. And that means that once you have high volatility and performance more than the S&P index, instead of being negatively polarized toward capital, are you repellent, Bonnie, or are you attractive? Are you repelling money? Are you scaring it away? Or are you attracting it? When you're using U.S. Treasuries as your capital asset, you're negatively polarized toward capital, and then you can't raise money. The cost of capital is 10 to 15% a year or more. When you actually flip the switch and you own BTC, you're positively polarized and you can raise infinite money. If you're capable of creating a company and raising capital, I mean, you have to be very talented to run a company. Then you have to be more talented to raise capital. Then you have to be smart enough to flip the polarity on your balance sheet to Bitcoin. So it's high volatility, positive return capital. And then you will grow very rapidly. And you want me to give you an example of how rapidly? MicroStrategy had a market cap of $1 billion 4 years ago. And it had an enterprise value of $666 million, and it had $500 million in cash, dead money. We flipped the switch. We've raised $9.5 billion, $9.75 billion technically in those 48 months. the enterprise value of the company went from 600 million, 666 million to be precise, to 55 billion. And of course, the stock went up by a factor of 17. It went from $10 a share. Well, it was $9 a share at the bottom of COVID, and it's whatever it is today, 220, or I haven't looked at the price, but it's
235, I think.
You understand the strategy is don't reject volatility, embrace volatility, don't negatively polarize your capital structure, positively polarize it, think different, right? You know, most people don't want to think different. If you go and ask 100 B school professors, what should you do with the $10 million that you raised from the venture capitalists? They'll say, oh, be safe, invest it in short-term treasury bills, don't lose the money. It's the totally wrong thing to do, because if you raise 10 million and you invest it in Bitcoin, even if the business fails, you will have 20 million, 40 million, you will have $100 million business growing 20% a year in 10 years if the business fails, if you invest in Bitcoin. And so their advice is invest the 10 million and lose $1 million every single year, guaranteed, in shareholder value, and over 10 years, burn it all, right? That their advice is burn it all slowly for certain. And my advice is create $100 million bit. But think it through, Bonnie. It's 100 million in 10 years, growing 20%, which means it's 200 million in 14 years, which means it's 400 million in 17 years. Which means it's $1 billion in 21 years. You're a $1 billion business generating 200 million in income every year, growing 20% in 21 years. And that's if the P&L fails. So you see, what's really going on here is a revolution in thinking. Everybody thinks the balance sheet is a liability, and I should take no risk on the balance sheet, and I should try to invent new stuff on the P&L and work myself to death. But it's kind of like just saying, work yourself to death and beat all the competition and cut your cost and work harder. But by the way, invest your money poorly and lose it all for certain. And I'm just saying, maybe that's not such a good idea.
That was eye-opening. It really hit home because Taiwan is built on top of a lot of small and medium manufacturing companies. And that is what they're doing right now. You know, you got to be conservative, and you know, as manufacturing move to other countries.
Can I give you another metaphor? I mean, you're just describing zombie companies, and, you know, out of the 50,000 publicly traded companies, 49,500 are probably zombie companies like that. They've got a business. It's a good business. They make money, but they can't grow, and they become uninteresting, and they're trapped, and they're staring at NVIDIA and Google and Tesla, and they're looking at these big tech trillion-dollar companies are going to crush them to death. And it's like, how do you compete with Apple and Google and Microsoft and NVIDIA and Tesla and Amazon, right? That's the plight of most businesses, small, mid-size, even big businesses. If I was in your board meeting, Bonnie, and you said, hey, we've got a great company in Taiwan, and it's generating 500 million in revenue, and it's like growing 2% a year, but we're worried, what should we do? And I was a brilliant investment banker. I would say, well, I think you need to do a transformational acquisition. You know, I've found a company which is $250 million, and you have $250 million in cash, or you can borrow $250 million. I found a $250 million company, and it's growing 50% a year right now. But I think it's going to grow between 20 and 40% a year for the next 20 years. And it's a monopoly in its space, and it's unstoppable, and it's got this product that everybody needs. Nobody can stop. But you know what? All the other big tech companies, all the other investors, they've been ignoring it because they're just, you know, arrogant and ignorant, or they don't really think they need it. And so I can sell it to you, and you know, eventually it'll be worth $10 billion, growing at, you know, 20% a year, and it's going to 10x your stock price and save your company and, make your employees rich, make your shareholders rich. Would you like to buy that thing? And then the board would go, well, of course we want to buy that thing, but it's probably too expensive. Like, what do they want? Like 10 times revenue or 20 or 30 times revenue? We can't come up with $20 billion to buy this thing, or 10 billion. So, and I would say, well, I'm a friend of the owner, and he just wants to sell it to you. He'll sell it to you for 1 times revenue. You want to buy a $250 million company growing more than 20% a year for the next 20 years, and you can buy it for 1 times revenue. And then you say, well, maybe it's going to be hard to integrate, right? I mean, do all the employees, are they arrogant? And, well, what's the catch? There must be a catch. Am I going to get sued? And I say, well, no, there's no employees. There's no payroll. Well, do I have to put in more money? No, you don't have to put in more money. You're like, well, it must be too good to be true. What is this thing? And I say, well, this thing is Bitcoin. It's like you can buy $250 million of Bitcoin growing 20 to 40% a year at 1 times revenue, integrate it with your company. Well, what if I change my mind? Well, you can reverse the transaction and sell it. Wait a minute. This is the universal high-tech, high-growth merger partner, but, will it be trapped in Taiwan? I want a global company that's selling to New York and Paris and London. Yeah, the people that buy Bitcoin live in New York and Paris and London. So you're telling me I get a global technology company? Well, it's actually better. There's no company. So Bitcoin is the universal merger partner to all these companies. If you want to globalize your business, increase the growth rate of your business, increase the appeal of your stock, it's not that hard. You just have to think different, open your mind. Bonnie, I kind of feel like it's like 1900, a bunch of people with factories in Taiwan, and they're like, well, it's getting harder to manufacture stuff and costs are coming down. And I show up and I say, well, I got this new thing called electricity. I think you ought to put, yeah, but I heard my friend, he put electricity in his house and his house burned down. Or I have another friend, I read a story that someone touched it and it shocked them. Yeah, I mean, there are some houses that burn down and some people did get shocked, but, I can't see it. I don't think it's real. No, trust me, it's real. I don't understand it. Well, I understand, but if you kind of rip out the steam engines and you rip out the water wheels and you actually put electric motors, I get a good idea. Why don't you actually create electric appliances? Why don't you actually put it in the products and the hair dryers and the washing machines, put it in your cars, and you might even create a television with it or a radio. I don't understand. Yeah, I know you don't understand. That's why it's new. It's technology. There's this point where you either going to have a fast death or a slow death or take a risk. The problem with most companies is they're dying a slow death. It's like they're definitely going to become irrelevant over 30 years, but nobody wants to take a risk because they feel like it's better just to die slowly or go with a whimper instead of a bang. And of course, my message to everybody in your country, and it's the same as my message to everybody in the world. We've harnessed digital energy. Once the world changed because of electromagnetic energy. John D. Rockefeller changed the world with chemical and liquid energy. The difference between us and the apes is fire. It's material energy, right? If you want to catapult your nation or your company or your family, kids are freezing and starving to death, try fire. Right? Bitcoin's digital energy, you can use it to revitalize your company or your products. MicroStrategy's done both, right? We put it on our balance sheet, and now instead of 500 million of zero earning money, we have 17 billion going up 50% a year. But we also created a treasury operation. We create securities that feed the fixed income market and the options market, and that creates a huge amount of shareholder value. I'd love to tell you I understood all this 4 years ago. It's just like the first dude that trips over fire and he's like, fire, it's bright, oh, it's hot. I can use it to cook food. I can also use it to clear the trees and burn down 100 acres and farm. I can also use it to scare away the wild animals. I can also use it to sharpen the spear tip or to create things with. And eventually we figured out how to use fire to create steel, and we created skyscrapers, right? So
Yeah.
Nobody figured it out at the same time. But the point is, you want to advance as a civilization, you got to embrace technology, you got to learn new things, and you can't be afraid of them. You should be inspired by them.